I'm Keith Hayes, and you'll be sick and tired of my face by the time this series ends, but I hope you'll bear with me as I shuffle through the streets of this lovely town, popping in and out of its pubs, and tell you a story of its bloody past. In Saxon times, it was known as Lewes. The modern term for toilet might have come from it, I suppose. But the town became respectable and is now known as Lewes. Lewis, not Lewes. But its original name does come from Saxon times. And this pretty little town in East Sussex, nicely tucked under the shelter of the South Downs, has had this high street for longer than written records go back. Pretty normal sort of UK high street, really. Typical shops and stores each side of it. Looks just like High Street UK. High Street UK, from John O'Groats to Land's End, have all got a history. But this little stretch of road has a violent and bloody history. And that history reflects much of the history of the country itself. A pint pulled from a tap is the tipple of most Englishmen, I suspect. They sure tippled in Lewes in the past. This pub goes back to 1742. There's a list of the landlords to prove it. Today, sitting on the high street, it's one of the 16 pubs in a town of 16,000. 150 years ago, there were 63 pubs in Lewes and 18 breweries. And in those days, there were only 9,000 people. Wow, what a tall tale. Yes, but true. And over the next few programmes, I'm going to take a closer look at some of the bloodier and more sensational events that have occurred on this seemingly normal high street. But right now, I'm just going to paint a general picture of this tiny English town, before I get to the bloody and the exotic. The high street is dominated by a Norman castle. One of the oldest Norman castles in the country. It was built not long after the invasion of 1066. It housed the Norman garrison, who ensured the people living inside its walls were kept safe. Indeed, Lewes was a walled town. And there is brick-by-brick evidence of the 4 gates that gave entry to the town.
By the way, Lewes isn't a corruption of Lou. It's the Saxon word for a hill. And if you thought that Lewes had lots of pubs, it has far more hilly roads. Far more even than the rest of the country, I think.
The modern-day Lewes is well used by its people. Lots of shops, markets, and even tea rooms. It also has a lot of parades. At the end of the school year, a ceremony takes place called patina. All year long, pupils design and build exotic costumes ready to parade down the high street.
Raphael, I walked onto the high street in Lewes a couple of years ago to be greeted with a lot of children running around in funny costumes. What on earth is that all about?
It's called Moving on Parade, and it's something we started 16 years ago. It started from a wish of parents to bring more art into schools because they see how much schools struggle demands of the government, and they wanted to support the school in that. So we started something called Patina, which is Parents and Teachers in the Arts.
All right.
Moving on Parade celebrates the transition for primary to secondary education of all the children in Lewes District Council.
Very colourful costumes. How do you decide what the costumes are? You're the artistic director, so you better give me a good answer on this.
So every year we have a theme. And the theme this year is Wonders of Our World. Last year we asked the community to suggest different artists that they would like to see on the parade, and loads of suggestions came in. And we shortlisted the huge list into 16 schools, which was the amount of schools that took part last year. We had Frida Kahlo, and we had Picasso, and we had Van Gogh, and we have Giacometti, and we had Andy Warhol. So they doing illustrations and designs, and then the patina artists take all the children's idea and adapt it into a practical design that the children are actually able to make in a couple of days. We invite about 8 or 10 people from every school to come and learn the skills of the carnival costume, and they start to make the big make that the school going to carry. And after that, the patina artists going into the school and work with the children on their individual costumes. We're trying to really do it as a enjoyment, getting people together. They're all going to meet in their secondary school later on. We're trying that they'll meet each other beforehand as well. So we're doing events all year round for the benefit of the whole community, not just for the year sixes.
You do other things. You said you go to the schools. What do you do in the schools?
So our next event is on the 22nd of April. It's called Dance Your Socks Off. And because the theme this year is Wonders of Our World, we thought it'll be really fun to have an evening of teaching flamenco, bhangra, and the sirtaki with world food. We're going to have sushi, we're going to have international cocktails, we're going to have professional dance scholars who are going to teach the dance, and it's going to be a really fun event. And that's for children as well.
See, cocktails. I told you Lewes is a drinking town.
Yeah, we're pretty good at cocktails. Growing every year. So we making contact with our twin towns. We're making contact with Lewes in America. There's a group of them, artists from Lewes in America, coming to Lewes in June. We made contact with them. And what we would really like is to use this format in other places, because Lewes is the only place that we know of who celebrates their moving on from primary to secondary schools, and it's people that hear about it, they are impressed, and it will be really nice for other people, other children in other communities to do the same.
Yeah, I did realise it was unique to Lewes and a very unusual operation. Well, how do the children react to it? I mean, generally speaking, do you get great support from the kids?
Yes, we do, and because it's been going for so many years, it becomes a part of the cultural calendar of the town. So young children know that when they get to year 6, they'll do the moving on parade, and all the siblings did it, and they've seen the rest of the older ones doing it. So it's kind of something that they look forward to.
I'm known for wearing strange costumes. As you can see, my hats are still there in this episode. So I don't think I should be marching, but I most certainly will come to the cocktails.
Great.
Raffaella, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
The adults have their turn, and on November the 5th, the biggest Guy Fawkes celebration anywhere in the world takes place. Exotic costumes, burning crosses, effigies stuffed with fireworks. Rousers, that is a banger to you and I, are tossed casually into the street. And almost every citizen of the town, old and young, takes part. There's a bit more to the bonfire celebration, though, than just the gunpowder plot. In 1553, Queen Mary was determined to bring Roman Catholicism back to England. Right here on the High Street, she burned 17 people at the stake who wouldn't convert. The dungeon, where they were held before being so horribly slaughtered, is still here, up these steps, being the last walk the condemned men would take. It was a horrible death. They were put into tar barrels, which were then set alight. Pretty bloody stuff. But we'll leave the High Street for a few minutes, then we'll bring you more gore, blood and guts. Lovely scene, isn't it? Beautiful green grass, blackberry bushes surrounding the lawn. Peaceful. The chaps, gliding a bowling ball across the cropped turf. Couldn't be more pleasant. But this bowling green was originally the tilting ground for the castle. A bit like the local football club, Norman knights turned up regularly to practice cutting off ears, piercing armour with pike or sword. Or even more dramatically, they charged at one another with pointed lances, determined to knock an opponent to the ground, ready to perform the coup de grace, that last fatal plunge of the sword in the unguarded bit of flesh, the throat. Ugh, makes me feel quite faint. But the Knights of 1100 had to be honed to military perfection. Not only was there the odd disgruntled Saxon around, but even his own side could give the king a rough time. And indeed, they did. But before we go to another bloody incident on the Lewes High Street, let's stay with the tilting ground for a moment. In the 1700s, the soldiers, who had wielded their swords with such skill, discovered guns and started shooting one another. That more or less ended the fun of charging at one another with horses. And so this bit of real estate was up for grabs, and the local crown bowlers seized the opportunity in 1751 and turned tilting into bowling. But this is Lewes, remember. Nothing is ever what it seems. The horses had ploughed up the ground a bit, so the surface wasn't even. You can see the bumps and ridges across the green. So the type of bowls played on this green was different to any played through the British Isles. And 500 years later, it still is.
It goes way back to medieval times, but so far as we're concerned here, we've been playing here since 1753, and there is some evidence to suggest that in the mid-1600s there was bowls played here. And we're reputed to be the oldest society, sporting society in the world. very unique, and we're unique in many respects. I mean, firstly, the woods are unique in that most of them over 100 years old. They're lignum vitae, which is very, very hard wood, and that's the reason, of course, they've survived as long as they have. The jack is biased, which is very unusual, and the green is undulating, very undulating. There's not another green anywhere in this country, so far as we know, and it makes for a very fascinating but unique game, one that we can't play any other club because there aren't any that play like this. We have a membership of 50 only or 55 now, because that's all the woods we have. They're handed down from person to person. We have a championship game in the summer because we have a competition throughout the year, which is within the club. And I think the winner of that is not only our own champion, but we can consider he's world champion. As long as we can retain the green, and I think we can retain the green, as long as we can do that, there's no reason why this society shouldn't continue ad infinitum almost. It's a great Lewes establishment.
So bowling in Lewes is completely unique. And very difficult. But back to blood and guts. In the last episode, I spoke of a battle between the king and some of his barons. The king, Henry III, held the castle. Now, as you can see, the castle pokes up into the sky quite a bit. The Motter is a man-made hill. And as you can see, a few hours of overtime were put in to build this pile of dirt. From the top, you can see in every direction for miles. Almost impossible to creep up without being noticed. And there was a moat to cross as well. But it's called Castle Ditch Lane, the name reflecting its purpose all those years ago. The king, rather unsportingly, had more men on his side than the barons. But it seems he fell asleep at the switch, and on that meadow over there, Simon de Montfort drew up his troops and joined battle. Fighting was fierce. After all, they'd all been on their own tilting greens, preparing for such a showdown as this. The battle was short and sharp, and the barons put the royal troops to flight. And they showed no mercy. The priory had been used as a staging post by the king's men, and they now took refuge there. It's little wonder that tilting grounds became bowling greens, because despite all that training, the king's men panicked. Screams of terror from both monks and soldiers echoed around the priory. As burning arrows thudded into thatched roofs, setting the priory buildings afire, fighting spilled over to here, our beloved but bloody High Street. Soldiers were either massacred or crushed to death as they tried to get across the bridge over the River Ouse. For the king, it was a complete disaster.
De Montfort, he split his armies up on the hills behind us in the Chalk Downs. He split his army into three forward not flanks, but bunches of men, you know, groups. And they would have been around 1,500 people in them. So a lot of people. So he had 1,500 people. Then he kept men back for himself. So his left flank went off to Barkham and met Prince Edward, and they went off to Barkham. Prince Edward, being a hothead and chasing them all the way up to Barkham, away from the town, was one of the reasons the king's men lost. Because and they were mounted knights. And then the other two sets came into the town and were met by the king's army and Richard of Alameyn's army on sort of the hills around us, really, because where we are now would have been outside the town.
And it was a pretty bloody war.
It was dreadful. It was absolutely dreadful. It's hard to imagine. Lewes is a little place, and on the hills around Lewes, where most of the fighting was, you know, there were tens of thousands of people trying to kill each other. And it was hand-to-hand close combat. And you didn't often die of wounds on the battlefield immediately. You were usually whacked with a broadsword and you would die of internal bleeding, or you would, have limbs severed and die slow death, or you would die death from infection, etc.
So there you go. Not quite one man, one vote, but some slight recognition that the divine right of kings isn't exactly what the Almighty had in mind. A spark of democracy was ignited, and it happened in Lewes. As usual, this is thirsty work, and I need to take a break. In fact, have a tipple, or perhaps go to the loos. Don't leave me, there's more blood and gore to come. Oh, Lewes, what a place! Lewes increased in importance as the Norman occupation took hold. Not that it wasn't important before that. In Saxon times, the town had 2 mints. And in case my pronunciation confuses you, those are places where coyens were made, not a sweet that is eaten to try to disguise what you've been drinking. The now much larger cathedral town of Chichester only had 1 mint, which not only indicated the importance of Lewes, but started a sort of battle of popularity between the two places. The struggle for the rights to hold assizes, for example, created a tug of war that saw Chichester hold trials for a while, only for Lewes to get them back. Lewes won. The Crown Court and Lewes Assizes are still located in the modern town, and they ain't going nowhere. Mighty though the Norman castle was, it was dwarfed by the Cluniac Priory, just across this small valley. William de Warenne, who actually fought at the Battle of Hastings, was granted Lewes, along with lots of other goodies, as the spoils of war. His wife Gundrada, a religious lady, asked for and got a sponsorship to establish the priory, just 20 years after England was conquered. Henry VIII's chief vandal, Thomas Cromwell, pulled it down in 1547. Doing the bidding of the king who had fallen out with Rome over his love life. But the workmen of the 11th century were first-class masons, and some of these buildings have lasted to this day. Look at that, almost 1,000 years old. It wasn't just Henry and Thomas who were vandals. The good burghers of Lewes did their part over successive centuries, digging up the grounds and using the stones to build their garden sheds. By the time it was destroyed, the priory dominated the Lewes skyline. Its great church was immense, and the whole complex had its own hospital, dormitories, dining hall, and a wharf. Boats sailed up to the priory to carry and fetch goods. How times change. This river, the Winterbourne, carried ships and barges up to the docks in the priory. Nowadays, it would barely carry a paper boat. The priory was vitally important to the local economy, bringing in goods and attracting important visitors.
The ship would have actually come very near to the edge of where the tennis courts are. That's where, because you've got the Cockshoot river or stream which fed into the Ouse, and then yes, there would have been a wharf here from which they unloaded all the stones that they used to build the priory. Because what we see now is a lot of the infill. It's like the cavity walling of the priory. The outside, the dress stone, which is now used in places like Southover Grange, came from Carr on the Isle of Wight or from Caen, so it all had to be imported. It was a significant part of the town. It started small with only 4 monks, but over the course of about 400 or 500 years, the numbers swelled. The maximum number we had was probably about 100 monks. But the church, the big church that was built in the 14th century, was bigger than Chichester Cathedral. It was massive. It would have dominated the skyline in Lewes, so it was incredibly important. And it looked both ways. It looked inland because Lewes was the mother priory for other Cluniac monasteries in the UK, and it also looked towards Europe with its mother house in Cluny. We do a lot of education work with a whole range from tiny children up to adults to get them interested in different aspects of the priory. And the trustees of Lewes Priory Trust are very keen that it's always open and free access. And it's a beautiful place that everybody can come to. They can learn about the history. They can sit in our herb garden and contemplate. And we've just started a new kitchen garden, which will grow vegetables. And again, this is for the community to get involved in. So it's very much based in the community of Lewes.
But there's nothing like a bit of competition to stir the blood of a true Lewesian. And sometime in the 15th century, a big fight is recorded between the bailiffs of the town and the prior's men in a local tavern. One of the 63 pubs that once existed in the town, no doubt. The town was walled in 1275, and a fat lot of good it did. When de Montfort's troops attacked, they swept into the town with no trouble. That then caused the town's nobility to strengthen them. They remained intact from then for some centuries, when they came down to the hammers of developers as the town grew. Entry to the town was by 3 gates, north, south and west, each now remembered through the name and a few remaining stones where the wall had been. The walls may have gone, and most of the priory. But many buildings in Lewes have stood the test of time and the vandalism of kings. This church was originally a hospice attached to the priory, and this was an early hospital from the same period. And Cromwell wasn't daft enough to pull down a Tudor manor which Henry had given as part of a divorce settlement. He kept Anne of Cleves house for himself. Within the town walls, this building has more than stood the test of time. St Michael's was the original castle church, built about 1240. It's the parish church of the town and holds both church services and musical concerts today. There is a helmet and depiction of Sir Patrick Hamilton on one of the walls. Lewes is close to the coast and open to attack from French marauders, who regularly attacked the coast. On one occasion in the 16th century, ships sailed up the Ouse far enough for them to be spotted from inside the town. This noble knight depicted here was renowned for his courage in seeing them off. Later, revolutionary Tom Paine was married here before decamping to the Americas. And its spiral tower is one of the few surviving in the UK. Before we disappear into the folds of one of Lewes's hostelries, there's one more legacy from Henry's break with Rome. His successor Queen Mary wanted to restore the Roman Church to England, and she was very vicious towards dissenters. 17 people who refused to give up their beliefs or had read the Bible in English were seized and thrown into a dungeon in Lewes. In November 1545, they were marched up these stairs out to a stake and put in tar barrels. Burning to death in that way was a very horrible way to die. One more chapter in the bloody Lewes High Street saga. This act of savagery has not been lost in the mists of time, however. The 17 martyrs, as they're known, are remembered on November the 5th in the biggest bonfire ceremonies of any Guy Fawkes night in the world. 7 bonfire societies stage a joint procession through the town, torches blazing, effigies of Guy Fawkes and of so-called enemies of bonfire, those who have behaved badly in the year, pulled on carriages stuffed with fireworks. It's a colourful and impressive procession, but with an underlying commemoration of the 17 dead. The parade stops at the town's war memorial for the laying of wreaths to the fallen. Prayers are said. Banners extolling the names of the martyrs are held high. And rousers, or better known to us as bangers, are freely thrown around as the people march. It's a colourful parade. And I feel underdressed, with just one of my hats to show off. But bonfire, as it's known locally, is not the only memory of bloody Lewes. It suffered a far worse fate from a hidden foe. The Black Death. From bloody red to deadly black. Next episode, how rats destroyed a major port and brought more historical carnage to Lewes. Until then, a bloody goodbye. Poor old Lewes. I need a drink.
A couple of things that you may not have known about Lewes. I'm going to, on this rather miserable morning, I'm going to go from Lewes to Christina. One of my tall tales.
The life of a journalist, or a nomad, or a roamer, or whatever you want to call me, can bring up some very interesting situations and some very interesting places. And strangely enough, one of the places that I remember very fondly is Kosovo. And I had a couple of experiences there that I thought were amusing. They certainly weren't at the time, but in retrospect, not bad. On one occasion, I was there training some journalists, and there was a kerfuffle outside the office window. and I saw that the police were surrounding a man who was waving a revolver, and they had batons in their hand. Perhaps not unreasonable in the circumstances. But one of the chaps that I was training was an American photographer, and he was busy snapping away. And the police spotted him and immediately made for him, and he bolted back into the office. The police poured in through the front door, and my office was on the second floor. And I went down the stairs and in a very brave way said, "Halt, who goes there?" Thinking that perhaps the gesture might worry them, as they were Kosovar police and I was as a Brit. And an English voice came back and said, "Who are you?" To which I responded, "Well, who are you?" And it turned out that these police were being trained by an English policeman. To which I said, well, if you're training these police and I'm training these journalists, you know very well that you cannot take a camera away from somebody in the street, except if you are suspicious that it affects national security. Other than that, you have no right to take a camera from people. He was a half-decent sort of chap, and we sat down and we resolved the issue. But in the meantime, my staff, seeing the police flood in, and Kosovo being Kosovo, where in fact the police had up until that particular time, post-war, in the early 2000s, had a considerable amount of power. And so they had rushed up the stairs and they had phoned General Agim Ceku. Ceku was a hero of the war with Serbia. He later became Prime Minister, and I believe today, is still a minister in charge of the armed forces. But I got to know him and I found him to be a very decent and honest man, even though he sees things as a soldier, and one would expect that. But anyway, we had become friends, and the staff, my staff, had phoned the general and said, General, the police are going to lock up Mr. Keith. To which the general said, "Tell him not to worry. If he gets locked up, I will send the army down and get him out." It's the first time that I've had an army and the protection of an army to get myself out of a sticky spot with the police. As it turned out, the jail did not beckon, the army did not come down, but the fact that General Ceku was ready to send them in and get me out was very comforting. As it's coming up to Christmas, the other thing that I found very amusing is quite often very serious people get into debates about how intolerant we are, and that societies should recognize those who are of different faith and so on and so forth. Well, Kosovo is 98% Muslim. And one of the things that I wasn't sure about, and I didn't want to offend my staff, and I said to them, would you like to celebrate Christmas? Do you want to decorate the office? And what do you do? Oh yes, please, they said. Well, I had a little bit of money in the budget, so I said, well, off you go, get a few decorations. And off I went. I came back later in the day and there had been hectic activity, and I walked in and there was more ribbon, more baubles, more Christmas decorations, more tinsel than you could shake a stick at. There was a Christmas tree, there was absolutely everything. And you understand I've never been to a brothel, but that's the way I think that an inside of a brothel would look like. It was decorated to the hilt, and this in a Muslim country. And I walked out later that day and they sort of laughed at me and said, Mr. Keith, we don't really worry about these things. We celebrate Christmas and we enjoy it, even though we're Muslims. And sure enough, outside the main hotel, the Europa Hotel, there was a nativity scene, quite a large one, put there by the city. And around the corner was a mini mook, one of those sort of open jeeps that you find at the seaside whenever we're allowed to go to the seaside. The people travel around it. and around the corner came the Mini Moog, with music blaring, jingle bells and carols and so on and so forth, and with a Father Christmas yelling out, "Merry Christmas, have a happy time," and so on and so forth. It took me aback. The one thing that you expect if in a Muslim country is that they don't celebrate Christmas. My goodness me, in Kosovo it was a Christmas to remember. It was terrific, and we had several parties initiated, I may say, by my Muslim staff and not by me, although I'm always good for a party. So, out of jail, courtesy of the General, Christmas in a Muslim country with Mini Moogs, Father Christmases, nativity scenes, and an office looking like a brothel. Doodle pip.
Well, a couple of little bits and pieces for you on this very miserable Friday morning. Beginning to brighten up just a little bit now, but it's not going to be very nice all day. So we'll call that a day, and call that a week. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your support of Mirador, and I look forward to seeing you in some forum or another in the future. Right. Let me find the going away bit, and say toodle pip. Okay, toodle pip.
From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub.
Let me just remind you, pub quiz every second Sunday in the month at the Black Horse. Next one, second Sunday in March, beginning at 8 o'clock. Every Sunday, lunch, very nice roast lunch, very popular, book in plenty of time. And during the season, Six Nations. So tomorrow there'll be another match. England against Ireland, is it? Yeah, I think it's England and Ireland. The last match of the series against France. Just a reminder, do avail yourself of the facilities. That's the Black Horse, Lewes High Street, well, a bit north of Lewes High Street, not much. See you there. Take care. Bye.